I'm Mark Golub, and this week, election 2016 found itself at AIPAC, where all three Republican candidates for their party's presidential nomination, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and John Kasich, along with Democratic presumptive nominee Hillary Clinton, addressed the overflow crowd of some 18,000 people who packed the Verizon Center Arena in our nation's capital to express their respective positions relating to Israel, Iran, and U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. I hope many of you had the chance to watch all four speeches on JBS. But once again, in this most implausible political season, the focus of the plenary and all the pre-plenary buzz was on Donald Trump. Before the session, the buzz was all about whether AIPAC members would walk out of the arena in protest when Donald was introduced. And you may know that Rabbi Rick Jacobs, president of the Reform Movement's Union for Reform Judaism, led a group of rabbis in protest, refusing to be present in the room when Donald Trump spoke. Actually, virtually no one left the hall when Trump entered to polite applause. But Donald was still able to make news. For although in uncharacteristic fashion he used a teleprompter to deliver his prepared remarks, at one moment he went off script in an off-the-cuff reference that evoked a rousing response from the audience. Here it is.
With President Obama in his final year, yay. He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me. And you know it better than anybody.
Now, some of you may have been watching JBS's live presentation of Monday afternoon's AIPAC plenary, and if you were, you heard JBS's Eli Kohanim offer this first-hand account of the mood of the room, she was there, when Donald Trump made those comments. Here's Ellie.
You know, one of the funny things that he said that believe it or not, the crowd kind of jumped up again and was laughing and clapping away. He said something along the lines of, and this is President Obama's last year in office, yay. Now, I can't say that everybody in this 18,000 people are against the Obama administration, but something in the way that Donald Trump speaks just had everybody laughing and clapping for him. It was one of the things that was so mind-blowing about what was taking place was seeing everybody get up and give Donald standing ovation after standing ovation. And again, it didn't feel when you walked in the room that he was going to get that reaction, but over time, the more he spoke and laid out his policies and spoke very strongly and clearly about Israel and Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and how the U.S. should be treating its friends and how the U.S. should be treating its enemies. He just won the crowd over, and it was absolutely everybody standing up and giving him the ovation. There was one woman who was sitting next to me who started out telling me how much she didn't like him, and she was getting up.
Yes.
So he was just doing a terrific job tonight.
The comments of Eli Kohanim, the voices in the back were mine and Thane Rosenbaum. Well, Donald Trump's reference to the president's ending his term, yay, and the response that evoked from so many in the audience has become the defining moment of the 2016 AIPAC Policy Conference. So much so that the next day at the closing plenary, AIPAC leadership felt it necessary to, in essence, chastise Donald Trump for his partisan remark and chastise the AIPAC attendees as well for their enthusiasm. Here's the president of AIPAC, Lillian Pincus, reading remarks on behalf of the entire AIPAC board, and you'll hear her voice literally crack, almost in anguish. Lillian Pincus.
There are people in our AIPAC family who were deeply hurt last night, and for that, we are deeply sorry. We are disappointed that so many people applauded a sentiment that we neither agree with or condone. Let us take this moment to pledge to each other that in this divisive and tension-filled political season, we will not allow those who wish to divide our movement from the left or from the right to succeed in doing so. Thank you.
The remarks of Lillian Pincus. Well, how should the Jewish community view the candidates' appearances at AIPAC? And how should we understand AIPAC's response to Donald Trump? For some insight and analysis, we're so pleased to have back on our JBS phones one of American Jewry's leading journalists and commentators, J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large of the Jewish Forward, after serving for 7 years as the Forward's editor-in-chief. And J.J. covered the AIPAC conference for the Forward. He was at the Verizon Center when Donald Trump spoke. And J.J., thank you so much again for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Mark. Glad to be here.
Okay, J.J., you heard Ellie Kohanim's description of how she felt Donald Trump sort of won the crowd over. From your vantage point, how do you feel the AIPAC audience first responded to Trump in general?
Well, the first thing you need to know is my experience, most of the press was kept up in a gallery away from the crowd. So in past years, when speakers have been talking, I've made a habit of walking among the aisles and looking to see, during standing ovations, was everybody standing and clapping, or was it President Bush, for example, in 2004, spoke at AIPAC, and there were front-page articles all over the country about the 22 standing ovations he got. And I walked through the aisles during his speech, and I saw about half of the people present sitting with their arms folded while the others were standing and cheering. So now I have no way of knowing, because they wouldn't let us into the hall. They kept us in a gallery above, whether the standing ovation was universal or not. Having said that, Trump has a magic. He's got a way of captivating his audiences. You see it in all over the campaign trail that he's got a level of enthusiasm that very few candidates can ever achieve. Sometimes it reminds me of the wizard from The Lord of the Rings, who spellbound and essentially hypnotized those who listened to him. The fact that 2 hours earlier he had said in a press conference, Trump that is, that he was going to make Israel pay back all the foreign aid it's received. That didn't come up, and people didn't seem to notice. The fact that he had told the Washington Post, and he said it before, he wants to pull back from NATO. Now, if he's going to pull back from NATO, how is he going to be the president that stands by allies? In other words, he contradicts himself all the time. So getting that sort of standing ovation tells you more about his audience than it tells you about him. So who is that audience?
Yeah.
It is, well, let's start with the fact that AIPAC has gotten itself in a bind over the last 10 or 15 years by becoming a must-go-to place for presidential candidates, which means they have to invite everybody. The objections to Trump were not that, Ted Cruz, who spoke right after him, also attacked Obama, but that didn't raise a single eyebrow because he hadn't been a controversial invitee. He's not regarded as anti-democratic. He's a person that people disagree with, in many cases, but nobody talks about him as being a threat to our democracy. Nobody talks about him inciting his crowds to violence, or lying the way, I mean, when you say 1 minute I'm Israel's best friend and the next minute I'm neutral. Trump is a special category. They were stuck inviting him because they've become such an important forum, such an important platform, that they now have to invite all the credible candidates. And once they've done that, they've got a guy on the stage who has this magic force over crowds. So I think it's the combination of AIPAC's overly successful achievement in making itself a must-attend platform. It's nobody knows what to do with Trump because we've never had a candidate like this. And you've got an organization whose leadership is truly and intentionally split between Republicans and Democrats, so that they can be bipartisan, but whose membership is increasingly drawn from conservatives, from hawks.
The leadership, by the way, has traditionally, certainly of the last, 10 years, 12 years, been dominated by very active Democrats.
Well, they always try and make sure that the president and top figures in the leadership are people who have access to the White House. That's one of the principles of an effective lobby, and it's certainly been one of the principles of AIPAC. When there's a Democrat in office, they generally choose a Democrat as president. When there's a Republican in office, they generally choose a Republican. They want to be able to guarantee that America will give Israel the running space it needs to defend itself.
All right, there are so many
frequently misinterpreted as being in favor of every Israeli government policy. They're in favor of letting Israel determine its policy.
Yes, exactly right. There's so many things you said in your first comment that I want to come back to, but I first want to finish this whole theme. How did you feel about Trump's comment about President Obama and this impromptu exclaim at the end of a prepared piece of his teleprompter speech where he said, "Yay," and you heard it. When you say you were in a gallery, were you in a gallery which enabled you to look down and see the entire room, or were you,
Yes.
I know there were many press put in a gallery that had to watch the entire event on TV screens. Could you literally see, JJ, the crowd itself?
Yes, there were windows. We were standing above it. If you picture any sports arena, the press is above everybody else, overlooking the crowd.
Were the windows?
Yeah, we could certainly see, but it was so far away, we were so high up, that it was hard to tell who was standing and who was sitting.
I follow. Were the windows open?
No.
Okay. So is it hard for you to describe personally your sense of how the audience reacted? And by the way, it's not enough to know how you think the audience reacted. You were there. What was your reaction?
I just thought it was classic Trump. There's a little bit of immaturity in him. He doesn't really have syntax in his sentences. If you read the transcript that the Washington Post has on its website of his meeting with their editorial board earlier that same day, it's almost incoherent. His stream of consciousness flows out. So even when he's got a written speech, which was a rarity for him, he interrupts himself with these little words like "yay."
Yes.
So it didn't strike me as being particularly offensive. It was essentially a childish way of saying the same thing that many Jews feel and that Ted Cruz feels, which is that they don't like President Obama.
Yes, exactly.
I think they're exaggerated in their criticism of Obama, but it's certainly their right.
Okay. So what was your feeling when the next day Lillian Pincus rebukes Trump and rebukes the AIPAC attendees who responded positively to the yay comment?
I was moved. It reaffirmed my belief that AIPAC is essentially an organization that tries to speak for our community. It's in a tight spot. Our community doesn't always agree with the Israeli government, and they try and walk down the middle. And I felt bad. It's when the penny dropped for me that they'd boxed themselves into a spot by again, by being the place everybody has to come to. They couldn't say no, even though it was clear that he was going to make trouble.
Okay, come back to another point you made, and in some way this is more interesting to you and to me, but the audience should understand that you and I have been at many, many AIPACs. We've often been at the same table, a few seats from each other. The tables at AIPAC for the press have been on the main floor. We can see the rostrum, we can see the speaker, and as you say, although we're not given total access anywhere we want to go, we certainly have had contact with the attendees. I've been told, and again, I stayed in New York and I was covering it from our studios this year, but I was told by my staff that was there, it was a very different feel for the 18,000 people who had to go to two venues. It's always been at one venue. Now it was not only the convention center, but the Verizon Center, and that presented some logistic difficulties, and one had to go through, checkpoint after checkpoint. But specifically for the press, how did you feel AIPAC dealt with the press, which is there for one purpose, to be able to give the readers and the viewers who are unable to get there in person an opportunity to get a real sense for what was going on? What was your feeling for the way the press was dealt with this year at AIPAC?
Well, I have to start by saying that for an awful lot of readers, the press isn't there for the sole reason of giving you a window on what's going on. A lot of readers think that we're there in order to insult, to tear down, to impose our leftist view, as it were. So
you're terrific, JJ. Keep going.
I think it's that has sort of a good political leadership recognizes that you can't treat the press as though that were true, even if you think it's true, because then they'll make your life more miserable. I have always had the experience, even when they roped us off from the rest of the audience, I've been around long enough and I know enough people that they let me walk around. I know that most reporters are kept behind the rope line in the press section. I've never had that restriction. So to be boxed away, even when we entered the Verizon arena, we were brought in little groups like kindergartners trailing after a minder to our own elevator and brought to our gallery. And when I saw people I knew, people from the Orthodox Union, people from B'nai B'rith, I had to shout to them, and they looked at me in alarm. Like, are you trying to get me to talk to the press? It was a very different feeling. It may be, and I haven't spoken to AIPAC about this yet, it may be that once they had the Verizon Center with its press galleries up above, the way sports venues have, they figured, why not put the press up there? It's easier than trying to rope off a section of the arena itself. It may have been simple logistics, or it may have been a growing sense that we can now control the press. And of course, it's a mistake. You can't control the press. All you do is get us mad at you.
Yes. Bowie, in full journalistic disclosure, I am a supporter of AIPAC. I'm part of the Washington Club. I believe in what they do. I think that they are one of the most important Jewish representatives on the American scene today, and they do extraordinary work on behalf of the state of Israel. So that's my overall feeling. My sense, JJ, as a journalist who has been there, in every year, each succeeding year, there seems to be a greater antipathy between AIPAC and the media. Maybe it's because they got burned in some way. Maybe it's because AIPAC attendees complain if somebody asks them a question. And we were told at one point you can never ask a question of an attendee. If I saw you, I could interview you. If I saw Malcolm Hoenlein, I could interview Malcolm Hoenlein. But I couldn't stop a general person because they didn't want They didn't want attendees to feel harassed. But my sense is, and I want to hear whether this is something you've experienced as well, there is simply a growing distance between AIPAC and the Jewish media, maybe the general media as well. And my feeling is it is counterproductive, and that AIPAC in some way is not doing itself a service by creating, whether it's a wall or whether it's a skybox between us and the conference. Your sense?
I want to make 2 points here. The first is the way the Jewish community is evolving, you find more and more, a greater and greater percentage of the people who show up for pro-Israel events are Orthodox Jews. And a smaller proportion of the non-Orthodox community is willing to take the trouble to stand up for Israel. It's politics, it's assimilation, it's the demography of the Orthodox community and its birth rate. And the Orthodox community has a greater level, first of all, more conservative politically, and second of all, has a greater level of suspicion, which I have to say is well earned, of the good intentions of the press. So that what they get from their membership, and they listen to their membership, is going to move them in that direction. My second point is an anecdote. I guess about 5 or 10 years ago, there was this whole thing going on with a couple of AIPAC senior officials who had been arrested and put on trial for actually passing information or receiving information, or passing information to Israel. They were suspected of violating the 1917 Espionage Act.
Correct.
It turned out that the case was thrown out of court in the end. But while it was going on, it was very hot, and an awful lot of people in the media were delighted to find finally the smoking gun of AIPAC being disloyal and supporting that imperialist power in the Middle East, Israel. I got a phone call when I was the editor of the Forward from a reporter at NPR. We spoke for a half an hour. The main point I tried to make to her is that AIPAC is democracy at work. When you can mobilize citizens to call their representatives, you can have an impact. And if everybody did that, we'd all be better connected to our government. But AIPAC is good at it. And I said, look, there's an army of angry Jews out there who are ready to pick up the phone if they feel that the Jewish homeland is in danger. And there's a lot of things that AIPAC does that I don't agree with, but the bottom line is I sleep better at night. Now, I'm quoting myself, knowing that there's somebody in Washington who's got my back.
Yes.
This story went on the air on NPR, and what they quoted me at one point only. AIPAC says it does nothing wrong, but there are some who knowledgeable followers of the community who say that they're up to something no good. Here's J.J. Goldberg from the Forward. They have an army of angry Jews out there, period.
Oh, my God. Doesn't that make you go livid?
It makes me go livid, yes. I wrote a letter. I become furious.
Yes.
I know that it makes everything I write go down with more suspicion because it makes the entire press look bad. I am very, very... I follow very closely the views of the Israeli military and intelligence community. I have a lot of contacts there. Not a lot of people do this, and they tend to be well to the left on the Palestinian issue of the elected government. The government says this is what we need to stay safe, and the army and the intelligence community says, no, it's not what you need. So what is it based on? So that makes me, in effect, a leftist because I quote the army and the intelligence community.
I follow. Okay.
The behavior of people like that reporter who interviewed me reduces my credibility. It reduces the credibility of all reporters. So if you have something shocking and important to tell the public, it's harder to tell the public.
Yes, yes. And it's also why, JJ, the public has grown to mistrust and dislike the media in general almost as much as they dislike politicians. It's because of what was done to you. And the fact that an
organization like AIPAC is trying to give Israel the space to make its own decision, that's not the same thing as endorsing its policies. There are times when AIPAC is pushing, right now they're pushing a bill that would inhibit companies from observing a boycott of Israel or territories under its control, which in effect is legitimizing Israel's settlements in the West Bank. So you could say that's the Israeli policy now. That's what Israel wants. AIPAC is doing it. I don't think it's a good idea, but that doesn't make AIPAC this monster that many people make it. It makes it, as I said before, the guys in Washington who have my back.
Okay.
And so many in the press just want to bash it.
Okay. I want to sneak in one question now that is an aside. There are people who are asking, what's the difference between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz? And the election has gotten very testy. And today, Cruz's super PAC ran an ad with a nude picture of Donald Trump's wife, Melania. I think we even have that picture. Yeah, this was run. And the suggestion is, do you want this woman to be the first lady? Do you have any comment at all about the Ted Cruz-Donald Trump comparison and what options there will be for Republican voters if either Trump or Cruz gets the nomination?
Well, first of all, it's becoming unlikely that Cruz will get the nomination. The biggest difference between them is that, first of all, Cruz is consistent. He says what he believes. He doesn't forget from moment to moment or change his mind or say what he thinks people want to hear. Point two, Cruz knows something about what he's talking about. He knows what NATO is. When Trump says that he wants to loosen the laws on libel or loosen the laws on waterboarding and torture, we're talking about scrapping the Constitution in one hand and ignoring our international commitments. When we sign a treaty against torture, that becomes American law. We can't simply change international law. We are committed as a nation to observing it. So these things exhibit the extent to which Trump simply doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know how to be president. People were worried in 2000, I guess it was 2000 campaign, when George W. Bush couldn't name the president of Pakistan.
Right.
It may seem trivial, but if you get woken at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're saying something happened in Benin or the Ivory Coast, what are we going to do? The president's got to know what Benin and Ivory Coast are.
I understand.
You've got a split-second decision. He doesn't know anything, and he doesn't think he needs to know anything. He just released his foreign policy team. One of them is a recent college graduate whose resume begins with having been at Model UN.
Okay. JJ, I would love to keep going. I'm always grabbed by the clock, but when I never want to end my conversation with you. I told you the last time, you're out of this world, and you will have to come on as often as you can find the time to do so. The election is far, far from over. There are many questions I still have to ask you, so I'll just keep chasing you. And kol hakavod for all the wonderful work you do at The Forward, and thank you for always being accessible to me.
Right back at you, Mark. You do a tremendous job for our community, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. The thoughts of J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large of the Jewish Forward, a fabulous journalist. And again, he says many things that are important. I wish we had time to follow all of them up. We will continue to talk to J.J. often. As always, my thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director, Serge Goldberg, production coordinator, to Dara Golub, the associate director of JBS, and to the producer of Election 2016, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.